Do you know how much a missile that lands on a school costs? $2 million. But the right question isn't how much. The right question is who benefits from this. While you watch images of desperately fleeing civilians, someone shakes hands in an air-conditioned meeting room, smiling as they sign a billion-dollar contract. War, my friend, is not just a tragedy, it's a market. A market that grows even bigger when the world bleeds. That's what no one told you. That every shot, every bomb dropped, every tank rolling down a deserted street, has a price. And that price isn't on television, but in the financial reports of the world's largest companies. The day a drone flew over a village in Yemen and launched a precision strike, killing 14 civilians, including a 6-year-old girl holding a doll, Raytheon's stock price rose 3.2%. That's right, an attack that destroyed a family boosted the profits of those who produce mass death. That girl had a name, Amal, but on Wall Street charts, she only accounted for 0.1% of the quarter's profit margin increase. Who cares about names when war is being sold? Does this sound exaggerated? Let's look at the facts. In 2022, the world set a record for military spending, $2.2 trillion. An absurd portion of this money was allocated not to defense, but to offense, to production, to the development of smart, clean, and precise weapons, as if that would wash the blood from the soil. The curious thing is that the more wars break out, the more these contracts multiply, and the more civilians die, the more the shares of these companies are valued. The math is cruel, but simple. The greater the chaos, the more money circulates, and while you work, pay taxes, and squeeze your budget to fill your shopping cart, part of your money goes to finance this, to pay for bombs, to sustain a system where death has become a production line. You know that politician who talked about protecting national interests? His pockets may be lined with donations from these companies. That's why you never see these contracts on the evening news. They prefer to show you the smoke rising, but not who pressed the button or who received the bonus at the end of the month. This story begins where innocence ends. Because once you understand that war has become a business, everything changes. You begin to see the speeches differently. You begin to distrust the silence, and you realize that, while the bodies are buried in mass graves, there are executives, toasting with champagne, and worst of all, with our money. So I ask you, who is profiting from other people's blood? We're going back in time. Not to tell a story like in history class, but to reveal how it all began and why it never stopped. Brace yourselves, because what comes next still endures. It all started with a lie, and like all good lies told by men in suits, it was laced with patriotism, fear, and promises of security. On a sweltering August morning in 1964, 2 American ships claimed to have been attacked by Vietnamese vessels in the Gulf of Tonkin. What followed was a fiery speech in Congress, flags waving, headlines screaming aggression, and, the next day, the passage of a resolution that opened the door to one of the most lucrative and bloody wars in modern history. But the attack never happened. It was fabricated, a pretext created to justify the deployment of thousands of troops and billions of dollars in weapons. The truth came out decades later, but the contracts, the factories, the profits, all of this was already entrenched. Vietnam was the perfect laboratory. There, the largest corporations of the military-industrial complex tested helicopters, chemical weapons, combat tactics, and most importantly, how to profit from a war that couldn't be won, but that didn't have to end either. Companies like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and General Dynamics grew exponentially during the conflict. The longer the war dragged on, the more profitable they became. The pattern was set. That remained was to find the next enemy. And there's always a new enemy lurking. Then came the Middle East. Oil, religion, and tribal rivalries escalated into wars financed by global interests. Iran versus Iraq. The United States invaded Kuwait, then Afghanistan, then Iraq again, and, after each intervention, multi-billion-dollar contracts were signed between governments and arms manufacturers. Halliburton, for example, made absurd profits from logistical services in Iraq, which included everything from troop resupply to the construction of prisons and oil pipelines. Coincidentally, then U.S. Vice President Dick Cheney was the former CEO of Halliburton. Conflict of interest? No, they call it a market opportunity. Afghanistan was another cruel example. 20 years of occupation. An entire generation grew up without knowing what it was like to live without war. All this while billions were spent on equipment, drones, and munitions. Most contracts were emergency, without bidding. And, when the soldiers finally returned home, they discovered their traumas were not a priority in the budget. Those who benefited, benefited. Those who bled, were left behind. The truth is that, since World War II, the arms industry hasn't stopped, and it doesn't want to stop because for them peace isn't profitable. And that's why the logic has been reversed. Instead of manufacturing weapons to protect people at war, wars are now created to justify the manufacture of weapons. Sounds like a conspiracy theory. Then explain why defense spending only increases in times of peace. And who finances this? Who maintains this cycle? Banks, investors, funds that sell the idea of safe stocks in times of instability. Wall Street doesn't hate war, it invests in it, literally. While you see the destruction, they see green numbers rising on their screens. Because, in the end, for them, it doesn't matter who won the war, what matters is who profited from it. But if you think all this is a thing of the past, wait for the next installment. Because the present, the one you're living now, continues to be bought, sold, and destroyed by the same hands. And you, without knowing it, could be paying for this war. Sirens wail at dawn in Kidu, their sound echoing across continents, not through the air but through the exorbitant prices of the international grain market. When the missile hits a grain silo, the echo translates into inflation for the bread bought at the bakery. The Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, FAO, confirmed that the global food price index has soared again, crushing poor countries that spend up to 60% of their income on food alone. While headlines speak of side effects, the empty shelves tell the true story. Children in Ethiopia swapping classes for humanitarian food lines, Brazilian families substituting protein for flour, thousands of small farmers bankrupt because Russian fertilizers have doubled in price. Turn the globe and pay attention to Gaza. Silence is not peace. It is the lack of electricity to transmit the cries. After 15 months of bombing, more than 44,000 civilians have died. Schools have been left in ruins, hospitals, without medicine, perform amputations in the dark, and Human Rights Watch calls this unprecedented destruction. Today, it is not the explosion that kills the most, but hunger. The media reports 125 deaths from malnutrition in just 4 weeks. Numbers that rise as the world complains about the price of gasoline at the pumps, but fails to see the aid trucks stuck at political borders. In Eastern Europe, 6.9 million Ukrainian refugees are experiencing the fastest growing diaspora since World War II. Women push baby strollers through crowded stations in Poland. Elderly men carry black and white photos that fit in pockets where passports used to be kept. Each displaced person costs the European public purse an average of €12,000 a year in housing, medical care, and integration. Who pays you? The taxpayer. Have seen taxes temporarily adjusted and almost never return to their previous levels. But if the bill comes to us in bills, it comes to them in dividends. The world reached a new record for military spending, $2.718 trillion in 2024, a 9.4% increase amid the climate crisis. Lockheed Martin, despite reporting occasional losses, closed the second quarter of 2025 with revenues of $18.1 billion and still distributed dividends, maintaining its title as the Pentagon's largest supplier. When the sirens sound in Kyiv, market analysts activate buy alerts on Wall Street. A missile accident turns into a stock market rally, and no one questions the connection because the profit is legitimate, the compliance is approved, and everything is legal. The consequences aren't limited to the bank account. Modern wars torment us from afar. Collective anxiety, paralyzed investments, a drop in tourism to peaceful countries on the same continent, flights cancelled for fear of airspace disputes. Remember that job that never materialized? You can thank the risk insurers that became more expensive after the Saudi refinery explosion, and that sus clinic that never opened. Part of the public budget was diverted to increase the strategic reserve of diesel in case the shipping routes in the Red Sea are permanently closed. The numbers are shocking, but the faces hurt even more. Consider 9-year-old Lena, a Ukrainian refugee in Bucharest who sleeps in a gymnasium because her school has been converted into a dormitory. Consider 17-year-old Youssef, paralyzed from the waist down in Gaza, who is learning to code with a donated tablet because there is no wheelchair. These stories never appear in quarterly earnings reports, but they are the true chain of production. Suffering transformed into capital. Now take a deep breath and look at your wallet. The gas tax, the increase in your electricity bill, the rise in the price of basic food baskets, everything finances the process. When you press accept on your automatic billing, part of the amount travels, invisibly, to a vault where executives calculate new target markets. You paid for this war, without knowing it, and if the present already hurts, wait for what's coming. In the next section, we'll look at the abyss that opens when no one slows down. The dawn of a grim future begins, not with the roar of a missile, but with the metallic crunch of a nuclear submarine silently leaving the shipyard at 4 in the morning. Inside, 20 crew members handle warheads capable of killing millions. Outside, market analysts prepare reports predicting more geopolitical volatility, ideal for those who make their living speculating. The Stockholm International Peace Research Institute has just warned. The 9 nuclear-armed states are not only modernizing their arsenals, but also planning to expand them, beginning a race against time since the collapse of the USSR. Moorhead is a blank check to hell. We are signing hundreds of new checks every year, and no one recognizes the handwriting until the signature explodes in the sky. Meanwhile, on the other hand, Washington is investing $6.9 billion in hypersonic missile research in the 2025 budget alone, an increase of more than 45% in 2 years. Moscow and Beijing are responding with equivalent projects, and India is racing to keep up. These weapons fly low, maneuver at Mach 10, and reduce nuclear decision-making time 2 minutes, or even seconds. Ask any strategist. The real danger isn't the launch itself, but a radar misinterpreting a shadow in space. Human error leads to automatic extinction. And yet, reports speak of a market opportunity, new sensors, new contractors, new production lines to solve the same nightmare being manufactured. Who benefits from the rush to the end of the world? If the bombs don't arrive first, perhaps the algorithms will. After years of diplomatic resistance, the UN finally began formal negotiations to ban killer robots, lethal autonomous systems, capable of choosing targets without human intervention. 166 countries voted in favor, but 3 powers Belarus, North Korea and Russia opposed, and 15 abstained. The result, no treaty, only promises. Manufacturers present prototypes at defense trade shows and sell the idea of clean and emotionless wars, as if removing the heart from the trigger would resolve the target's trauma. The risk, an AI with a software bug that mistakes a soldier for a first responder, a digital frontier where zero error is impossible. Who will be in charge of removing a drone that decides to fire on its own? And if atomic flame or killer code weren't enough, the planet is in a state of frenzy, pushing entire populations into conflict over water and fertile land. The Global Risks Report 2025 warns that extreme climate crises have become multipliers of violence, corroding fragile states and pushing armed populations into fights for survival. In East Africa, record droughts have sparked tribal clashes over pasture land. In South Asia, disputes between India and China over dams are turning rivers into silent weapons. In the Amazon, arson attacks are displacing landless villagers who seek refuge in the peripheries where everything is already scarce. There is no such thing as an isolated environmental war. Any climate spark finds a ready arsenal, land-ready investors to transform misery into dividends. When war becomes routine, exile becomes a statistic. The European Union Asylum Agency estimates that 4.4 million Ukrainians are under temporary protection, in addition to Syrians, Sudanese, and Afghans crammed into shelters across the continent. Germany spends between €12,000 and €20,000 per refugee per year on housing, healthcare, and integration. But by 2025, Berlin cut its federal aid by almost half. Mayors warn there are no beds for the next overcrowded train. If the numbers no longer add up in Europe's richest country, what happens when a nuclear climate or automated conflict doubles this flow of fleeing people? Who pays the bill when the budget for compassion also runs into deficit? Finally, let's face the uncomfortable question. What if the worst-case scenario weren't an explosion, but an erosion of rules, pacts, and empathy? Every abandoned treaty, every diplomatic cutback, every speech that turns an adversary into a plague deepens the chasm even further. Peace, they say, is built day by day. But what happens when the bricks and mortar are removed to be sold at arms auctions? Everything is about to collapse. In the next section, we'll open this wound and ask, after so much death bought with our own money, is there an antidote, or are we condemned to finance the next horror in monthly installments? They said the war was far away, that bombs fell where maps became grey blurs, but I saw the smoke cross my phone screen and infiltrate our daily lives like fine dust. In line at the supermarket, I heard the quiet crash of missiles as the price of rice changed 3 times in a week. You heard it too. you just didn't notice, because it came disguised as higher interest rates, an extra tax for security, a smiling advertisement promising investment in defense technology. Today, sitting here, I wonder, when did we accept that death became a financial asset? At what point did barbarism get a barcode, a quarterly report, a year-end bonus? Perhaps it was in the silence between one newscast and the next, in that second, when we changed the channel to avoid seeing blood, and someone, across the ocean, signed a billion-dollar contract. The dust settled inside us imperceptibly, covering empathy like soot, while well-fed throats toasted the success of another cycle of destruction. We review the path traveled up to this point, and everything seems a straight line. From every war emerges a bigger company. From every bigger company emerges a more aggressive lobby. From every lobby emerges a law offering tax breaks to those who produce strategic weapons. The cycle is perfect because it turns pain into unsquandered dividends. Blood fertilizes stocks. Fear irrigates investment funds. Reconstruction generates new cement and steel contracts. Think of Afghanistan, 2 decades of occupation that ended in a chaotic 24-hour withdrawal. Think of the wrecked homes in Gaza, already assessed as an opportunity by multinational construction companies. Think of the Black Sea ports, where grain shipments are once again sailing for less than 3 times the cost of marine insurance. It's not a collapse, it's a business model. And like every model, it needs goals. The goal is for peace to remain unattainable, just enough to keep demand alive, but never close enough to close the factories. Because if the machines stop, many fortunes evaporate before breakfast. And where do we find ourselves? Spectators, taxpayers, unwitting accomplices. We're caught in the middle of the bill. When the electricity bill goes up because the price of gas spiked after a pipeline explosion, there we are. When public pensions delay surgeries because a portion of the budget was diverted to buy supersonic fighter jets, we disengage. When we put on headphones to ignore the homeless man who returned traumatized from a war they swore was humanitarian, we validate the system. No one asked us if we wanted to fund autonomous drones, but our vote materialized in every purchase, every tax collected, every movement that interested those who narrated the war as a spectacle. We are co-authors of a macabre script that repeats itself because we need distraction and they need profit margins. Who can break this contract? Perhaps only those who dare to look at the entire bill without discounts and ask aloud, how long will I pay for the privilege of not seeing? Until when will I accept the silence clause that transforms the misery of others into domestic comfort? Alternatives exist, but they seem invisible in the glare of nightly explosions broadcast in real time. Transparency in public contracts, taxes on windfall profits, treaties that ban autonomous weapons before they learn to decide for themselves who deserves to live. Why aren't they implemented? Because they require political courage and constant social vigilance, 2 raw materials that are scarce when fear dominates the agenda. Even so, movements to boycott arms funds grow. Cities declare themselves free of military investment. International courts reopen shelved investigations. They are sparks, but sparks that make their way in the darkness. Every time someone rejects the rhetoric of the necessary enemy, a crack opens. Every time a newsroom decides to follow the money trail instead of simply filming the wreckage, a cog creaks. Every time a voter asks their representative who funded the campaign, a signal moves on the concrete wall that protects profits from suffering. It may not tear down the wall today, but it's already making it tremble. That's why I come to this conclusion without offering any consolation. There is no happy ending while someone calculates how much they earn per corpse and someone on the other side counts how many days of morphine their injured child has left. What there is, however, is a choice. Pretend the machine is too big, or risk throwing a wrench into the first nut that appears. Maybe it's sharing data that dismantles official narratives. Maybe it's voting against those who receive donations from the industry. Maybe it's marching for peace even when the streets seem deaf. History isn't an inevitable river. It's a mosaic of small actions that add up until they change course. But mosaics don't assemble themselves. If everyone does their part, there's still time to break the mirror where executives admire themselves while cities burn. If no one does, tomorrow we'll wake up to new bombs, new balance sheets, new refugees, and with the same question stuck in our minds: how did we allow it to get here? Because in the end there will be no innocence, only different levels of responsibility, engraved in the planet's memory. So I close this narrative by returning to the question that opened all the others: who benefits from the blood of others? Now you know the names, the numbers, the mechanisms. You know that war is not an inevitable storm, but a plantation irrigated by capital. You know that every bomb has an owner, every contract a CPF, every ruin a market share. You also know that the money that disappears from your pocket reappears in the profit tables of those who sell death wrapped in steel. There is no longer room for comfortable ignorance. The next step is yours, it's mine, it's ours. Perhaps it means demanding transparency, supporting independent journalism, educating children to recognize propaganda. Perhaps it simply means rejecting the cynicism of those who say it's always been this way, because it doesn't have to remain this way. Keep this phrase, let it burn like a match lit in the dark. You paid for this war, without knowing it. Next time the bill comes, ask, who gets the biggest cut? If silence answers, you already know. The real cost is measured in lives, and there is no cashback.